Hello, and welcome to the 50th episode of KRAD COVID Readings. I'm Keith R.A. DeCandido, and I gotta tell you, I really didn't think I'd be doing this for 50 episodes, but here we are. That's not entirely true. I figured one of the reasons why I decided to do specifically my short fiction is I knew I had enough to keep me going for a while. I've written upwards of 100 short stories, so it's not really surprising that I would hit 50, but here we are. Anyway, I also gotta say I didn't think we'd still be in quite the mess we're in when I started this back in March. This originally started with me and my wife, Ren Sims, reading a short story for Consolation, which is one of two virtual conventions that have been running on Facebook in the absence of actual conventions in real life. The other one is Continual. I strongly recommend both of them, by the way, if you want to check out some fun places. They're doing all sorts of entertaining things. Continual, in particular, is sponsoring lots of different online panels and discussions and workshops and things. And Consolation is just silly fun. Both very enjoyable. Anyway, we started with that, and then I decided, hey, it would be a cool thing to do a YouTube channel of readings, and here we are. So, since we've hit a landmark number, I thought I would go back to the beginning with a landmark story, to wit, my first one. Back in 1994, I had my first short story published. It was, I didn't do it by myself, it was in collaboration with John Gregory Betancourt, but it was nonetheless my first fiction sale. Prior to that, all I'd done was nonfiction for various sources. I'd written articles for Library Journal, for the Comics Journal, for Publishers Weekly, for Cream Magazine, a couple other places. But I hadn't published fiction until this book. The genesis of this story is kind of weird. In 1994, Byron Price Multimedia Company, for whom I worked, and the Berkeley Publishing Group, through their Boulevard Books imprint, started publishing a series of novels and short story collections based on Marvel Comics superheroes. I was actually the editor in charge of this. For the first couple of books, it was me and John, the aforementioned John Gregory Betancourt. He and I worked together. I was his assistant. And then after the first two books were done, he left the company and I took over. That line ran from 94 until 2000 and included over 50 different novels and anthologies featuring Spider-Man, the X-Men, the Avengers, Captain America, Iron Man, the Hulk, Fantastic Four, and so on. And we started with Spider-Man. There was a Spider-Man novel by Diane Duane called The Venom Factor, and we put together this short story anthology, the first of several, called The Ultimate Spider-Man. I've read stories from later anthologies, The Ultimate Silver Surfer and Untold Tales of Spider-Man. We also did The Ultimate X-Men, we did The Ultimate Supervillains, we did The Ultimate Hulk, and X-Men Legends, and all of that, and as well as a whole bunch of novels. Anyway, we did the cover for The Ultimate Spider-Man first, before we even had any stories set, because this was the first two books were seriously rushed into production. I don't know whether you can see it, but Spider-Man is framed there by four of his primary villains: the Vulture, Dr. Octopus, Venom, and the Lizard. We had a Dr. Octopus story, we had a Vulture story, we had a Lizard story, we did not have a Venom story. And this was 1994, when Venom was at the height of his popularity. We had submitted, now the way it works with media tie-in fiction is you have to submit proposals for approval by the copyright owner. The people at Marvel kept rejecting all the Venom stories we sent them. We sent them like half a dozen. Finally, fed up, we said, what do you want to see in a Venom story? They gave us a sentence. And based on this sentence, John and I wrote the story, because there wasn't time to assign it to anybody. It was like past the 11th hour at this point. And this is how I got my first fiction sale. They ask you, you ask any 10 writers how they sold their first story, you get 12 different answers. I'm pretty sure mine is totally non-replicable. Anyway, without further ado, here is An Evening in the Bronx with Venom by John Gregory Betancourt and Keith R.A. DeCandido. It is better that 10 guilty persons escape than one innocent suffer. Sir William Blackstone. Spider-Man! Hey, Spider-Man! Down here! There's a moment at the end of a web swing when you hang, caught between earth and sky, gravity and momentum. Everything is laid out like a picture postcard before you, and time almost stands still. Spider-Man! Spider-Man sighed. The perfection of the moment shattered. He shot a new web line, swung around, and landed on the corner of an office building 40 feet above the 9th Avenue sidewalk. Who had been shouting for him? His spider sense hadn't gone off, which meant there was no immediate danger. He scanned the crowd below and spotted a group of homeless people. A black man with dreadlocks was jumping up and down and waving at him. Despite the summer heat, the man wore a tattered olive green overcoat and a scarf. Probably crazy. Still, Spider-Man knew better than to fluff the man off. The homeless saw a lot of things people didn't give them credit for noticing. The man ran toward him, bringing a smell like rotting meat. His clothes, frayed and filthy, had seen better decades. Nevertheless, Spider-Man lowered himself to within 10 feet of the pavement on a web line. "What's the hubbub, bub?" he asked. "Chasing me," the man gasped. "But after me all across the country, man, he's gonna kill me!" "Who?" "Venom!" Spider-Man felt an unnatural chill in the 90-degree heat. "Did you say Venom?" "Uh-huh. He's trying to kill me, man. See, I lived in the city, underground, back in San Fran. He used to protect us, but he don't know more. He went nuts. Started wiping everyone out. I'm the last one left, and now he's after me. You gotta help, man. I'm a witness." "How'd you escape?" "He was tearing into my best friend, Harold. Gave me a chance to get out. Been running for days. Almost got me once, but I jumped a train." "So much for my quiet afternoon," Spidey muttered. Venom was an alien symbiote that had merged with a bitter, nearly insane man named Eddie Brock. He'd been at odds with Spider-Man for a long time, but they'd come to a truce when Venom relocated to San Francisco. There, Venom had pulled himself together and made himself into the guardian of an underground city of homeless people. Decided to spend his life protecting the innocent and seemed to settle down. Venom might be crazy, but there had always been a definite method in that craziness, and it didn't include chasing innocent people across the continent and killing them. Unless Venom really had gone around the bend. But he wouldn't believe that until he saw it. No, Spider-Man decided the homeless man's story didn't quite add up. "Where's Venom now?" he asked skeptically. "Dunno, man. Last time I saw him was Kansas. But he's gonna find me, man. He always does. Listen, Josias. We better get you somewhere safe, Josias. I'm gonna take you to the local precinct house." Spidey went through his mental map to locate the nearest police station and the quickest way there. Josias took a step back. "No cops!" Spider-Man sighed. "Look, the police are equipped to protect you if Venom shows up. He is a fugitive, so they want him behind bars too." Josias looked reluctant, but slowly nodded. "Okay, man." Spidey leapt down to the street and turned his back. "Hop on." As Josias did so, Spidey thought he has definitely let too much time lapse between baths. Then again, running from a lunatic symbiote didn't exactly leave time for showering. Captain Frank Esteban ran a hand through his thick black hair, then gazed up at the red and blue costumed figure perched on his office wall just below the ceiling. Spider-Man seemed perfectly at ease with his knees bent and his feet and shoulders flat against the wall. Definitely weird, Esteban thought. He'd never seen a costume up close like this before. It was going to be one of those days, he thought, wiping the sweat from his brow. The building's air conditioning had gone out, again, and the small fan on his desk and the 3 open windows did little to cool the room. They certainly did nothing to dilute the stench of the dreadlocked man now slouched in the one guest chair. "So let me get this straight," Captain Esteban said slowly, looking up at Spider-Man. "You want me to whip out the big guns against Venom, plus provide police protection for a homeless man just because he says he's being chased?" Spider-Man shifted uncomfortably on the wall as if he knew how ridiculous that sounded. "That's basically it, yeah." Esteban shook his head. "I can think of a dozen reasons to throw both of you out on your ears. You got any evidence of this threat? Any proof Venom's on his way here and means to hurt Josias?" Josias leapt to his feet. "You gotta help me, man! You gotta! He'll kill me! Quiet!" Captain Esteban said, frowning angrily. "Sit down and shut up!" He nodded when Josias slumped meekly into his chair. "I've had enough of this," he went on. "You keep saying he's going to kill you, but you won't say why. You're not exactly helping your case." Josias began muttering to himself. Esteban sighed. It wasn't going to be one of those days, he thought. It already was one of those days. "Look," Spider-Man said, "can you keep a secret?" Esteban felt like he was in high school again. "Depends." Spider-Man sighed, seemingly weighing his options. Then he finally said, Josiah's told me he's from the underground city in San Francisco. I never heard of any underground city. You wouldn't have. Like I said, it's a secret. But it's there. A section of San Francisco got buried in the 1906 earthquake. Then the city built Golden Gate Park over it. A bunch of homeless people discovered it a few years ago and set up a community there, complete with a ruling council. Venom's been acting as their protector. So, I'm one of the few outsiders who even knows that underground city exists. If Josiah knows about it, then he's got to be a resident. Okay, let's say I buy that, at least the possibility, Esteban said. Any way to check his story out? Not really. I only know the place exists because I helped stop a threat to it a while back. I've never even seen it. And the San Francisco Police Department doesn't know about it, so I don't know how we could communicate with the city short of flying out there and searching for a way in. All dead now, Josiah muttered from his chair. Venom killed them, man. Dead. All dead. Esteban shook his head and said, Okay, fine. Just wanted to make sure I had it right for the paperwork. You costumes don't have to deal with that stuff. Captain, Spider-Man said, Venom is a legitimate threat. Do you remember what happened the last time he was in town? I had to identify my cousin's body. Esteban saw Spider-Man wince under his mask. I'm sorry. Part of the job. He frowned to hide his discomfort, then pushed the intercom button on his desk. I want to see Lieutenant Neymar, he said. A few seconds later, a knock sounded at the door. Come, Esteban called. Lieutenant Neymar, wiping sweat off his dark forehead, stuck his head in. Yes, Captain? He said with a Pakistani accent, which I can't do. So. He took in Spider-Man on the wall and Josiah in the chair, but said nothing about them. We got a potential situation here. Esteban nodded to Josiah. He claims Venom pursued him from San Francisco and is now trying to kill him. Neymar paled. Oh boy. Yeah. I want him cleaned up and held pending my instructions. Right. Josiah got to his feet. No, man, you gotta stop Venom! He'll get me if you leave me here! Shut up! Esteban thundered. If you can't control yourself, I'll have you arrested for disturbing the peace and you'll spend the next month in jail. Got it? Josiah shut up. Neymar took his arm and led him from the room, shutting the door behind him. Esteban rose and paced. I want you to know I got real problems with your friend's story. Me too, Spider-Man said. I know he's not the most reliable. He's not reliable at all! He may even be certifiable. But the threat is real. The threat is potentially real. I won't argue the point. I thought it was better to be sure. I agree 100%. Esteban sat behind his desk once more. It's going to take some doing, but I'll get your friend his police protection, at least for the next few days. If Venom is really after him, that's not going to be enough, Spider-Man said. I think I better... I don't care what you think, Esteban said. I want you at the safe house, too. What? Spider-Man dropped from the wall. Did you say you were expecting me to tell you to take a hike, right? I've heard it all, too. Vigilantes have no place in this town, and civilians shouldn't interfere with police business even if they do wear costumes, and that Spider-Man is a menace crap, right? Basically, yeah. Forget it. This isn't the Daily Bugle at the DA's office. You may have dumped Josiah on me, but you ain't getting off the hook that easy. Esteban rummaged through the papers on his desk and managed to locate a blank index card. He scrawled a Bronx address on it. I want someone there who knows what Venom can do and how to stop him. I guess this wouldn't be the best time to mention that I've never actually beaten Venom before. Maybe not. But you drove him out of town. That's more than anyone else has done. He held out the index card. Spider-Man took it. This is the safe house. Give us 3 or 4 hours to get Josiah out there, and stay inconspicuous. Not much point in hiding someone than sticking a big guy... Not much point in hiding someone than sticking a guy in a bright red leotards on the roof. Didn't you used to have a black costume? Spider-Man winced again. Yes, I did. Venom's wearing it now. Oh. Good one, Esteban, he told himself. Well, just try to stay out of sight until then. At least until after dark. Unless Venom shows up. Spider-Man leapt to one of the open windows. Don't worry, Captain. You've done the right thing. Then he swung away on a line of webbing. Unless Venom shows up, Esteban thought. I'm counting on it. He remembered his cousin, a beat cop fresh out of the academy, who just happened to be in the wrong place at the wrong time when Venom plowed through a building in pursuit of Spider-Man. Esteban remembered the broken body on the slab in the morgue and knew he had to see Venom brought to justice, dead or alive. We're looking for a friend. Shotgun Sally looked up from her cardboard box and squinted. The sun hit the alley the wrong way and caught her in the eyes. She couldn't make out much beyond the shape of the man before her. He had blonde hair and seemed to be dressed in tatters and rags like her. He had to be one of the homeless too, not a cop. That didn't mean he wasn't dangerous. He could be after her squat, or worse. "Who you want?" she asked. Sally slowly moved her right hand deeper into her box, searching for the knife she kept for protection. "Black guy, name him Josias. He just got into town." Sally ran that through her mind. An image clicked. Black, dreadlocks, ugly guy. Kept muttering about Venom coming to kill him. "Spider-Man," she said slowly. "Spider-Man took him to the cops." "Which precinct?" She shook her head. Precinct, the word seemed meaningless. "Can you point the way?" She slowly turned and pointed uptown. "There. We thank you. Here. Get something to eat." He reached toward her and Sally recoiled. Where was her knife? Only slowly did she realize he had money in his hand. She snatched it. A $20 bill? She stared at it. Where did he get that kind of cash? Maybe he had more. She looked up, but he was walking away. His clothes seemed to be crawling all over his body. As he turned the corner, she could swear he looked just like a cop now, blue uniform and all. But hadn't he been a homeless guy? Then he was gone. She blinked. Had he been real? She fingered the $20 bill. Real enough. She scrambled to her feet. Food. Detective Sergeant Vance Hawkins arrived for the walkthrough of the safe house just before 4 o'clock. It was a 2-story row house in a line of nearly identical buildings in the Castle Hill section of the Bronx. Small, nondescript, and completely forgettable. The street didn't get that much traffic, and the neighbors tended to mind their own business. He parked in front, took his satchel from the back seat, and walked up the 6 slate steps to the front door. After he let himself in, he bolted the door. The safe house was exactly as he remembered it. Front hall, a door to the left leading to the living room, a door to the kitchen straight ahead. He went into the living room and dropped his satchel on the card table. There were half a dozen plastic folding chairs, an old TV, a small sofa, and a floor lamp. At least the TV had cable. 2 weeks ago, he'd had to babysit a minor gang member here. The kid had turned state's evidence on the other members of Hell's platoon, and District Attorney Tower ended up putting away a couple of very nasty characters. Compared to this, though, that job had been a cakewalk. Venom. I'd like to see him behind bars. Quickly, he explored every room of the house. At least the cleaning service had been here since he left. The few dirty dishes they'd left in the sink had been washed and left to dry in the drainer. The floors vacuumed, and the beds upstairs neatly made. He nodded, exactly as expected. He checked his watch. Everything had gone on schedule so far. In the living room, he removed his walkie-talkie from the satchel. He pushed the send button and said, "Hawk to chickens. Coop clear." "Roger that," came the reply. "Chickens coming in. Over." Hawkins went to the front windows and adjusted the mini blinds so no one could see in. Peering between 2 thin slats, he watched a gray van pull up behind his car. 3 officers in plain clothes got out of the back, along with Josias Doe. Hawkins wrinkled his nose at the thought. Josias, no last name, stank when he wasn't brought in. Now showered and shaved, with his dreadlocks trimmed and in clean clothes, he looked almost normal. Only the frightened way he kept looking around called attention to this group of 4 buddies seemingly out to visit a friend. There were other police officers stationed outside as well, Hawkins knew. He'd check in with them later. If Venom showed up, he'd be in for a real surprise. The New York Police Department was not to be trifled with. Hawkins crossed to the front door, unbolted it, and let the 4 men inside. The other 3 officers headed for the living room. Hawkins stopped Josias in the hall. "A few ground rules," he said firmly. "You stay inside at all times. You can watch TV in the living room or sleep in one of the bedrooms upstairs. You're to be accompanied by an officer at all times. Do not go outside, do not open the blinds, or look out the windows. Clear?" "Clear," Josias said. "We'll send out for dinner in a couple of hours. There should be soda in the icebox if you're thirsty. Or there's water." "Okay." Hawkins moved aside. Josias went into the living room and flopped onto the sofa. He stared raptly at the TV, even though it wasn't on. At least he's quiet, Hawkins thought. He could put up with quiet crazies. "Got a present for you, Hawk," Detective Sergeant Stephen Drew said with a grin. They'd been partnered at the safe house several times before, most recently last week with the gang informant. "Oh?" Hawkins said. "Here." Drew pulled a holster with an odd-looking gun out of his own satchel and passed it over. "Check it out. Latest anti-venom hardware." It was a bulky metal pistol, but unlike any Hawkins had ever seen before. It was light, for one thing, about half the weight of his 9mm, and its barrel flared like an old-fashioned blunderbuss. Ray gun? He asked. Sonic, Drew said, but not frequencies humans can hear. It's supposed to hurt dogs as well as Venom, so be careful where you point it. Right. He doesn't do loud sounds too well, or fire either. Yeah, Drew said, but a flamethrower would be a bit impractical. True. Hawkins started to undo the 9mm holster under his left arm, thought better of it, and strapped the sonic gun's holster under his right arm instead. Picking up his satchel, he pulled a chair from the card table and went to the far corner of the room. There he pulled out a pencil and a crossword puzzle book. More difficult than the New York Times, the blurb promised, along with all new Mensa-level questions. He had his doubts. Tricky pawn move, 2 words. He counted spaces and then wrote en passant. He hadn't played chess in years. Such games bored him. But he certainly remembered the rules. The Emperor Claudius's first name. Tiberius. He'd read I Claudius in high school. Tiberius Claudius Drusus Nero Germanicus Caesar. That was his full name. Occasionally, it amazed him how much trivia he had stored away over the years. A trick memory, his friends used to say, but it just came naturally. He sighed, then rapidly filled in the next 10 questions. At this rate, I'll finish the book by dinner, he thought. Hey, Hawk! Hawkins looked up. Yes? Drew grinned at him. Up for a little low-stakes action? He riffed a deck of cards. Hawkins noted Persons and Sakamoto were already pitching dollar bills into a plastic jar and taking chips from the kitty. Not this time, he said with a smile. Sorry. You lost. Hawkins just shook his head. He had learned years ago not to play poker with fellow officers. He counted cards and knew the odds tables as well as any professional gambler. He couldn't help but win. It wasn't sporting, and once he'd been accused of cheating when he won several $100s. One such experience had been more than enough. These days he stuck to crossword puzzles, acrostics, and mental games. Should have been a yuppie, he thought. Why couldn't he get partners so obsessed over Trivial Pursuit? He glanced over at Josias, who was still absorbed by the blank TV screen. Someone turn it on for him, he said. He's giving me the creeps. Drew obliged, but kept the sound off. Josias began to giggle just as Hawkins finished the rest of the crossword puzzle in short order. When Hawkins looked up, though, instead of a dumb sitcom, he found Josias engrossed in pictures from a bloody train wreck in Louisiana. That disconcerted him more than he wanted to admit. He narrowed his eyes. Have to keep a close watch on this one, he thought. The precinct house bustled with activity. Small, hot, and overcrowded, it was the perfect place to infiltrate, Eddie Brock thought. Nobody would have the time or the energy to take more than a second glance at him. Disguised as a policeman, he strode through the main doors as though he owned the place, cutting through the crowds of victims filing complaints and reports, past the lockup area and straight to the desk sergeant. There he paused and waited to be noticed. Yes, the sergeant said after a moment. She didn't look up. I'm supposed to report here, Eddie said. The woman squinted at the nameplate. Officer Badger, is it? Yes, Sergeant. I'm supposed to help out with the Venom case. Where's your paperwork? I'm supposed to be here already. I was sent over from the 15th. The sergeant sighed. Figures. The paperwork will catch up. We're plenty short-handed right now. She rifled through the papers on her desk, found a form, and quickly filled it out. Give this to Stan, room 403. Relief shift's going out to the safe house at 7:30. They'll get you fitted out and introduce you to the others. Thanks. Glad to have you aboard, Badger. Spider-Man arrived at the safe house just before 5 o'clock. Over the last few hours, he'd stopped home for a late lunch, restocked his web shooters, and left a message for Mary Jane, letting her know where he'd gone. The trip out to the Bronx had taken longer than expected. Then he had trouble finding the right address. Now, though, he perched on the roof of an apartment building across the street from the safe house, watching and waiting. It was pretty nondescript. He wouldn't have looked at it twice if he hadn't already known this was the place. Though there were several cars and a van parked out front, the place showed little sign of habitation. The shades had been pulled down on the second floor, and the blinds drawn on the first. The air conditioner hummed, though, so he figured people had to be inside. When a trickle of sweat ran down his back under his outfit, he longed to join them. It had to be over 100 degrees out now, he thought. Probably 120 in the sun. He gazed up the block. Few people braved the streets in this heat and humidity. A couple of kids sat out on the steps near the end of the block, and opposite them, working his way forward, a man with a plastic bag seemed to be searching everyone's garbage for deposit cans and bottles. A couple of cars drove past. Then a truck pulled up and parked 2 houses down. A middle-aged man in a gray overcoat locked it up and went inside. A mild tingle of his spider sense made Spider-Man tense. It couldn't be Venom. Venom didn't affect his spider sense. Slowly, he realized the tingle involved the man collecting cans and bottles. He was still rummaging through the garbage and talking to himself. Or rather, Spider-Man realized he was talking to the lapel of his shirt. Realizing he had to be a cop covering the outside, Spidey sank back a bit. Nothing to do now but wait. 7 o'clock came. Hawkins decided to check in with Andrew Lipinski, the most junior officer of the team, now stuck playing the homeless guy scavenging outside. Hawkins picked up the walkie-talkie and said, "Rags, this is Hawk. Come in." Lipinski's voice came over the speaker. "This is Rags. Webb's at 2 o'clock, and I found $3 worth of cans and bottles in the garbage cans. Over." "Congrats, Rags. You've doubled your pension. Shout if there's trouble. Hawk out." Hawkins couldn't help but smile. Webb's at 2 o'clock meant Spider-Man had been seen above. He doesn't have a wife to go home to, he thought. This rate it could take all night. Thankfully, his own shift ended soon. He glanced at the others. Their poker playing continued unabated. Hawkins was perversely pleased to hear Drew's cursing intermingled with persons cheering and gloating. He hid a little smile as he went back to his crossword puzzle book. 3 more puzzles, and he'd be finished. He went through them quickly, then glanced at his watch. Just before 7:30. Where was their relief? He should have checked in by now. As if on cue, Sergeant Karen Doyle's voice came from his walkie-talkie. "Queen Hen to Hawk," she said. "Come in, Hawk." Hawkins picked up the walkie-talkie again. "Hawk here, Queen Hen. What's your ETA? Over?" 2 minutes. How's the egg?" "A little cracked, but okay. I'll open the hen house door. Hawk out." Hawkins rose and stretched. "Time to wrap it up, guys." Grumbling good-naturedly, the other officers finished their hand and then began to cash out their poker chips now that relief was in sight. Shaking his head, Drew scooped the chips and cards back into his satchel. Each shift was responsible for its own entertainment, after all. Josias rose and went into the kitchen. Hawkins heard the icebox door open, then the pop of a soda can opening. "Check on him," he said to Drew. Then he went and looked out through the front door's peephole. Karen Doyle and 4 others were just coming up the steps. He undid the deadbolt, then opened the door for them. Doyle entered first, followed by Tom Cavetti. A new guy, a burly blonde, followed them, then Carlos Augustin and Mary Bristow. Hawkins spotted the telltale bulges of sonic pistols beneath their light jackets and briefly wondered how Esteban had pulled off requisitioning enough weapons for both shifts to get their own. "Any sign of Venom?" Doyle asked. "Not yet," Hawkins said. "I'm starting to wonder if he's going to show tonight." "He will," said the third officer, the new one. He looked vaguely familiar to Hawkins, which was odd. Had they met before? He raised his eyebrows and looked at Karen for an introduction. "This is Ed Badger from the 1-5, Doyle said. "He's on loan. Ed, this is Detective Sergeant Vance Hawkins." "Pleased to meet you," Badger said. "How's Josias?" Drew appeared in the doorway. "Been pretty quiet," he said before Hawkins could reply. "Then again, if I had Venom on my ass, I'd be quiet too." Everyone laughed, especially Ed Badger. Hawkins noticed his bad feeling about Badger got worse the longer he looked at him. Frowning, he tried to figure out where he'd seen the man. He hadn't been around the precinct before, of that Hawkins was certain. And anyway, Doyle said he was from the 15th. So where... Shaking his head, he moved toward the living room to get his satchel. So much for my trick memory, he thought with a mental snort. Maybe he needed to treat it like a puzzle, try to force the connection. Red is to apples, as Badger is to... Brock. It hit him like a sledgehammer, dredged up from some ancient trivia game. In certain Scots dialects, Badgers were called Brocks. It's him. He's found us. Hawkins felt his mouth go dry. Badger, Brock, Venom, was still in the hall, trapped behind Doyle and Cavetti, who were chatting amiably with Drew, trying to talk him into leaving his cards and poker chips for their use. Hawkins took a deep breath. Take it slowly and calmly, he thought. No sense rushing and putting everyone in danger. Josias had returned to his seat on the sofa, he noticed, bringing a can of Diet Coke and a bag of pretzels with him. He'd be safe there for the moment. Hawkins picked up his satchel, stepped out of Brock's line of sight for a second, and drew his sonic pistol. Would it work? He hoped so. He didn't even have time to warn Spider-Man or call for backup. Swallowing, he stepped out into the hall, covering his pistol with the satchel. "Coming through," he called. "Dinner's waiting for me." Obligingly, they cleared a path to the door for him. The second his line of fire was clear, he dropped the satchel and whipped up the sonic pistol. "Freeze, Brock!" he said in a loud voice. Hawkins heard several voices. "Christ, Vance, are you nuts? Hawk, what the hell are you doing?" But kept his eyes right on the blonde-haired officer. Then behind him, Josiah shrieked, "It's him!" Which perversely relieved Hawkins, since it confirmed his own suspicion. "It seems we've been discovered," said Badger. "We're sorry for the deception, but it was necessary. As is this." His clothes started to shimmer, shift, and reorient themselves into the more familiar ebon shape, with the spider emblem on the chest, the huge teeth and slavering tongue in the mouth, and those awful, hollow white eyes. In seconds, Venom stood before them. Hawkins swallowed and found his mouth suddenly dry. "This is a sonic pistol," he said with more conviction than he felt. "You will step back and raise your hands, or I will fire." Venom raised his hands. A section of his black suit streaked away from his chest, wrapped itself around Hawkins' gun hand, and tried to jerk the pistol away. Hawkins pulled the trigger, but didn't hear anything. Venom must have, though. He screamed and staggered back, but he didn't release his grip on the sonic pistol. Instead, he jerked harder, and the pistol flew from Hawkins' grip. It seemed to vanish into Venom's body. Then Venom reached for Hawkins. Detective Sergeant Hawkins had only a moment to scream. The first indication Spider-Man had of anything wrong in the safe house came when one of the plainclothes officers went flying through the front window in a spray of glass and mini-blinds. Spidey hadn't felt so much as a tremor in his spider sense, so he knew Venom had to be the cause. Moving with superhuman speed, Spidey shot web lines on either side of the falling cop. Whipping his wrists back and forth in a long practice motion, he formed the webs into a sort of cushion where they hit the ground. It softened the officer's impact, but Spider-Man didn't have time to give it more than a glance. He swung down toward the row house. To his left, he heard the officer posing as the homeless can collector, who had been in the process of being relieved by another faux homeless man, bellowing into his walkie-talkie for assistance. Spider-Man leapt through the gaping hole in the front window. Inside, several cops were struggling with balls of black goo attached to their shooting hands. Strands of black connected the balls of goo to a costumed figure in the middle of the room. Venom. Spider-Man launched himself at Venom and punched the symbiote on the side of the face with all his strength. Venom's head snapped back, but then he shook the blow off. "So, Spider-Man," he said, "once again you've broken our truce. We're very disappointed." A piece of the alien suddenly protruded from Venom's chest and slammed into Spidey's stomach. Then he struck Spidey backhanded across the face. "Is he getting stronger?" Spider-Man wondered as he rolled with the blow as best he could, striking the far wall with a disheartening thud. Venom always threw off his fighting style. Normally, he fought using his spider sense, a sense Venom neutralized. But that didn't matter. He had to stop Venom once and for all. He rushed forward, and again Venom sent him crashing back head over heels. The plaster wall shattered from the impact. His vision swam, and he heard a clear ringing tone in his left ear. Hearing cries of pain, he forced himself up once again. The officers needed him. He couldn't let them down. He shook his head, trying to clear his vision. The ringing in his head lessened. Venom was retracing the globs that had engulfed the cop's hands now empty of the sonic weapons. Venom had torn the pistols loose and absorbed them, Spidey realized. Venom turned and strode toward through the doorway in the next room. Spider-Man staggered after him through the small, empty dining room and into the kitchen. The back door stood open. Josias had fled. Spider-Man forced himself to leap forward and block Venom's way. He straightened. "You can't have him," he said with more firmness than he felt. "Give it up, Brock. We won't be cheated of our justice." Venom expanded, turning into a battering ram, and suddenly charged. Spidey leapt, spraying a blockade of webbing across the doorway, but he hadn't moved fast enough to halt Venom's rush. Venom struck Spider-Man another glancing blow, and then went through the webbing as though it were paper. Spidey tumbled and hit the refrigerator, then gave a low moan. He'd forgotten what a chore fighting Venom could be. He felt dizzy and sick from the pain, and the ringing in his head returned worse than ever. By the time he climbed to his feet and made it to the back door, the world seesawing wildly around him, Venom had vanished. Spider-Man staggered back in to check on the cops, but one of them, a blonde-haired woman, waved him off. "We're all right! Get after him! We'll call for backup!" Spidey didn't wait. Shaking off the dizziness as best he could, he jumped out the window, fired a web line to the roof next door, and pulled himself up. Venom and Josias couldn't be so far ahead of him that he wouldn't spot them if he got high enough, he thought. Maybe fresh air would clear his head. He heard a scream from several blocks over. Quickly, he shot a web across the street and scurried across, then crossed to the third block over. A scream sounded. Wasn't that Eddie Brock's voice? Then he remembered the two officers who'd been outside posing as homeless scavengers. Perhaps they'd given chase and found Venom. If so, their weapons must be working. He reached the roof of an overlooking house just as a pair of explosions shook the glass in the window panes around him. He steadied himself. Below, Venom and the two officers faced off in the middle of the street. The officers were shaking their hands in pain. Their sonic pistols were gone, but a pair of 3-foot-deep potholes now broke the pavement between them and Venom. Venom must have done something to make their pistols explode, Spider-Man thought. Overloaded them, perhaps? "Whoopsie," Venom said to the officers with a sneer. "Did we have a bit of a misfire there, boys?" Despite his words, Venom sounded a bit shaky to Spider-Man. "Pity, because we don't give second chances. On the other hand," he said, his voice growing stronger, "we know you were only doing your jobs, so we'll let you go. Besides, justice still needs to be carried out." Spider-Man shot a web and swung to the ground behind Venom. "Justice? Is that what you call it?" Venom whirled with a hiss. I thought your shtick was safeguarding the innocents now, Brock. Spider-Man knew he needed to stall for time. If he could pull himself together, maybe he could mount a proper attack on Venom and give Josias enough of a chance to get away again. And we haven't changed our tune, Spider-Man, Venom said. This doesn't concern you. This is a private matter between ourselves, Josias, and the Council. No one else, not you, and not these police officers. Venom disgorged the weapons he'd absorbed, then webbed them up with the alien's organic webbing. He started to move off. Tell them to stay out of my way. Advice you do well to take yourself. While we swore not to kill you, we will brook no interference. Josias must come to justice. Oh, no, you don't, Spider-Man muttered, giving chase. It wasn't easy to keep up with Venom. For one thing, night was falling, and this area wasn't as well lit as a typical Manhattan street. For another, the buildings were too low for any real web swinging. He had to trail Venom on foot, and he kept losing sight of his target in the shadows. It also took all of his concentration to keep from falling when the dizzy spells hit. From the direction Venom took, Josias was headed toward the interchange where the Cross Bronx Expressway, the Bruckner Expressway, and the Throgs Neck Expressway all met. Josias probably figured he could lose Venom in the latticework of exit ramps. Of course, Josias also probably figured he could have lost Venom in a cross-country chase, then figured he could stay hidden with secure police protection. No, Spider-Man thought Josias would only survive the day if he stopped Venom. Forcing down the cobwebs that muddied his brain, he pushed himself on. Josias had just picked a direction and fled. He didn't know if he could keep ahead of Venom, but no way would he stick around in that safe house. All those cops and Spider-Man hadn't been able to protect him. Josias was running out of options. Then he saw a highway exit ahead. Maybe I could lose him there. Maybe Spider-Man would stop. Of course, Spider-Man hadn't stopped Venom yet. Josias cut across a patch of overgrown plant life between roads, pushing through bushes and waist-high weeds. Then he tripped over a tangle of roots and came crashing to the ground. He tried to get up, but couldn't seem to get his legs to work. Having a little trouble, Josias? Josias froze. Venom. He tried to sit up, failed, then looked down at his ankles. A strand of the alien creature had tripped him, not a root. He looked up to face Venom. The man who had come to call himself Protector looked pretty woozy. Maybe those cops did some damage. Josias allowed himself a flicker of hope. Then he saw the red and blue figure coming up behind the symbiote, and the flicker became a spark. Spider-Man slammed full tilt into Venom's back. From the web-slinger's reputation, Josias expected some kind of snappy comment, but Spider-Man said nothing. He merely kept hammering into Venom, not letting up for a moment. Venom released Josias and, with a roar, turned to face his enemy. The two traded blows, circled, traded blows again. Neither seemed to be gaining any real advantage. They were both staggering. The hell with it, Josias thought. He rose and ran as fast as he could. Spider-Man saw nothing, heard nothing, felt nothing but the fight. A constant barrage of punches, kicks, slaps, and more punches. He was a red and blue blur, not pausing, refusing to give Venom a chance to recover. Suddenly, Spider-Man felt familiar tendrils wrap around his legs, and before he could do anything about it, they threw him clear. The symbiote cried, "Enough!" Spidey crashed into the door of a rust-laden car that must have been abandoned on the side of the road ages ago. His head pounded mercilessly, and it took all of his willpower to keep from falling unconscious. He tried to focus past his fluttery, swimming vision on Venom. "We warned you, Spider-Man! We warned you not to interfere! This is not your concern! You vowed to leave us alone!" Every word a struggle, Spider-Man replied. I said I wouldn't go after you, as long as you continue protecting innocents. I don't consider mass murder to be a good job of that." "What are you blathering about?" "I won't let you kill Josias." Spider-Man gathered every ounce of strength and climbed to his feet. "Josias will suffer the same fate as all of his kind do. Justice at our hand!" Venom turned and sprinted away, calling, "This is your final warning, Spider-Man. Do not interfere with our hunt again." Spider-Man didn't get it. Venom kept saying justice. That didn't sound like mass murder. Nor did calling Josias his kind. From anyone else, that might come across as a racist remark, but Venom was only prejudiced against people he considered not to be innocent. So his kind could only mean someone guilty. Once more, Spider-Man ran after Venom. This time he caught up with him under one of the Bruckner's entrance ramps. There, Venom had cornered his prey. Shiny black tendrils reached out, seized Josias, and smacked him around like a cat playing with a cornered mouse. When he saw that, Spider-Man knew Venom had changed. Venom specialized in killing people quickly and efficiently. He'd never gone for brutalization. "Is this how Harold felt, Josias?" Venom demanded. Spider-Man drew up, remembering Josias had described his best friend Harold as another of Venom's victims. How would Josias know how his friend had felt? Sirens grew louder in the distance. Spider-Man struggled to stay on his feet. He moved on sheer force of will. "Let him go!" he cried. Venom whirled. "Amazing. You should be unconscious or dead by now. We admire your tenacity, Spider-Man, but you're really starting to bore us. Heed our warning. Josias will be brought to justice." "Only one being brought to justice is you. Your hypocrisy disgusts us. You have the gall to call yourself a hero, yet you do everything you can to protect this scum." "I'm talking about yourself, Venom, not Josias. I won't let you kill him." He leapt forward into the tackle that took Venom down. Venom had to let go of Josias to push Spider-Man off. "Listen to us!" the symbiote cried. "We don't wish to kill Josias unless the Council decrees it." Spider-Man paused. "What?" "We are not here to pass sentence. We only want to bring Josias back to face judgment before the Council." Spider-Man found himself lost in a fog that had nothing to do with his head injuries. "Can't be true. Council dead," he gasped. "Don't be ludicrous," Venom snarled. "The Council sent me after Josias after he killed Harold McWilliams and ran away." "Killed Harold McWilliams? Ran away?" Spider-Man's head swam. Concussion. It must have a concussion. Venom started to blur. Or was that the alien changing form? So hard to focus. Josias killed Harold? "He told me you'd killed everyone underground." Then Venom laughed. Spider-Man stared at him in surprised confusion. "And of course," Venom said, "you believed him. Makes far more sense to believe that we murdered those we have sworn to protect on the say-so of a fugitive. You disgust and insult us, Spider-Man. Now, if you don't mind, we have a murderer to bring in." Venom turned, then cried, "No!" Spidey realized there wasn't anything to see. Josias had once again taken advantage of the distraction to flee, as he'd taken advantage of Spider-Man ever since he flagged him down on 9th Avenue that morning. "I'll help," he told Venom. As one, they loped forward. One way or another, Spider-Man thought, Josias would face justice. Josias ran up the ramp toward the highway. Behind him, he heard that awful voice. "You can't escape us, Josias. We will not rest until you've been caught and brought back." Reaching the highway, he paused, staring at the steady stream of traffic. It was dark now. If he could make it across, surely he'd be able to hide until morning. Maybe he could make his way to the docks in New York, jump ship to Europe or South America or anywhere else. Now that he was cleaned up, it wouldn't be so hard to find a job, would it? The police sirens were getting louder. He could see their lights flashing on the streets behind him when he looked back. Then he saw a dark shape starting up the highway ramp. Venom. He had to move. He had to get across the highway. Car after car zoomed by. He paused, looked back, saw Venom, and then panicked and ran. He never even saw the station wagon that hit him. "Blast!" Venom said when they neared Josias' body, sprawled out on the Bruckner Expressway. Traffic had stopped in both directions. Curious onlookers craned to see the accident. He should have stood trial. Spider-Man couldn't believe Venom actually said that. Maybe he had changed for the better. Not that it mattered now. Sirens wailed, approaching quickly. On the other side of the highway, traffic slowed to a crawl as drivers gazed in fascinated horror at the bloody scene. An instant later, several police cars pulled up the ramp. Venom would now be stopped, Spider-Man thought. Time for the big guns. Spidey could only keep his head from spinning. "Once again, we must take our leave, Spider-Man," Venom said. "We're willing to let you off the hook for breaking our agreement this time, since you were obviously taken in by this murderer. Next time, though, we may not be so forgiving." Spider-Man called on the last reserves of his strength. He straightened. "You're not getting away that easily, Venom." Behind him, he heard a sudden skid of tires and the crunch of steel colliding with steel. Glass shattered and a child screamed. Though whether in pain or fear, Spider-Man couldn't tell. He turned. Venom would have to wait. He sprang over the divider to the scene of the crash. A subcompact had rear-ended a minivan, doing extensive damage to the car. A couple of children in the minivan seemed hysterical but unhurt. The drivers were already cursing at each other, trying to assess blame at the loudest possible volume. They didn't need Spider-Man's help. As he turned back toward the other side of the highway, several cops pointed guns at him. One yelled, "Don't move, whiphead!" He looked around. Venom was nowhere to be seen. Another cop car screeched to a halt nearby, its swirling lights lost in the kaleidoscope of red that surrounded Spider-Man. A familiar voice called, "Lay off him! He's with us!" "Who the hell are you?" Copperwood yelled at. "Esteban, NYPD. Spider-Man's working with us to protect a witness." You mean the guy we called the meat wagon for? A pause. Looks like, yeah, damn. Didn't do such a hot job protecting him then, huh? You try going up against Venom. Esteban glanced at Spider-Man with concern. Yeah, I'll pass, thanks, Cop said, then walked back toward his car, gesturing to the people around him. All right, back in your cars, folks. Show's over. Esteban approached Spider-Man. You okay, pal? Been better. Did Venom do Josias? No, he got hit by a car on the road. Damn. Esteban paused. You, need a lift somewhere? Hell of a thing to tell the wife, Esteban thought. I gave Spider-Man a lift home. Well, not home as such. The masked man asked for a lift to Midtown. He would take it from there. Secret identity and all that. They had waited until the paramedics loaded Josias' body into the ambulance, and the woman driving the station wagon gave her statement. Then Esteban had led Spider-Man to his car, and they'd headed west on the Bruckner toward Manhattan. Spider-Man wasn't up to much in the way of conversation, Esteban found. He had to be hurting under his costume, perhaps a mild concussion, certainly lots of cuts and bruises. Still, sitting quietly in air conditioning seemed to do him some good. He was lucid enough by the time they crossed the Triborough Bridge to the FDR Drive to explain what he learned about Josias. I feel like this is such a waste, you know? How do you mean? Esteban asked. Here I went and busted my butt thinking I was protecting an innocent man from a killer. Instead, I helped a murderer escape justice. For someone who's supposed to be the good guy. Look, sometimes there aren't any good guys or bad guys, Esteban said. If you hadn't done anything, Venom would have caught the jerk and brought him back, and they probably still would have killed him. Josias would be just as dead, and Venom would be just as on the loose. I suppose. Spider-Man didn't sound very convinced, so Esteban tried another time. Venom threw one of my men, a good guy named Hawkins, through the safe house window. He wanted to thank you. If it wasn't for your web pillow, he might be dead now. Spider-Man looked at Esteban. Think about that the next time you're feeling useless. He took the 49th Street exit. Any place you want me to let you off? The corner's fine, Spider-Man said. I think I can web swing from here. You're sure? Yeah, I heal fast. Take care of yourself, Captain, and, thanks. Spider-Man opened the door and climbed out. Then he shot another one of those web lines and swung away. Sighing, Captain Esteban turned left on 2nd Avenue, headed for the Midtown Tunnel. Hell of a thing to tell the wife, all right. And that's the end. One of the things I did with the Marvel novels that I edited, of which this was one of many, was have a group of recurring characters who appeared in several. The novels all had their own internal continuity amongst themselves. And the characters of Captain Frank Esteban, of Detectives Hawkins and Drew, all three of those characters would appear again. They showed up in a bunch of different places, including short story, Improper Procedure, which I read in a previous KRAD COVID reading. They played a major role in Venom's Wrath, my first novel, which was another collaboration with Jose Arnieto. And they showed up in one of the Daredevil novels that Madeline Robbins wrote, and I think I had them in. Craig Gardner put them in Wanted Dead or Alive, and Diane Duane put at least Drew in The Octopus Agenda. So we had a regular cadre of NYPD cops who showed up in several stories, which was a nice touch. Esteban actually plays a much bigger role in Venom's Wrath, also as do Hawkins and Drew. Anyway, thank you very much for listening to this landmark 50th episode. I'm not sure what I'm doing for the rest of this week yet to celebrate this occasion, but there will continue to be more stories. I'm going to keep doing Monday, Wednesday, and Friday for a while, at least until I run out of stories. Thank you very much for watching. While it's maybe hard to find the print book of The Ultimate Spider-Man, there is an audiobook of it that has been released, which you should be able to track down. And you can hear that and read by somebody else, and as well as all the other stories. There's stories in this anthology from a lot of really cool folks, actually. I should mention Peter David. Actually, the first story is by Stan Lee and Peter David. Stan wrote a movie treatment for Spider-Man back in the late 80s, and Peter adapted it into a short story. So it's a slightly different take on Spider-Man's origin, but it's a good story. And then Tom DeHaven and Dean Wesley Smith, Lawrence Watt Evans, Ann Nocenti, Craig Shaw Gardner, Christopher Golden, David Michelini, Robert L. Washington III, Richard Lee Byers, Greg Cox, and then Peter David also did a solo story called 5 Minutes, which is excellent. They're all excellent. It's a really good anthology, and I recommend tracking down. If you can find the book, great. If not, the audio will You can find me online at DeCandido.net. My blog is at DeCandido.wordpress.com, and you can support me on Patreon at patreon.com/KRAD, because it would be awesome if you did. Thank you very much for watching, and please stay safe.